and public health,
Yeah.
nobody will ever trust the medical profession again. People say they shot themselves in the foot. They didn't shoot themselves in the foot. They shot themselves in the face. And
Yeah.
what we've got to do is get a sworn public inquiry where people are actually liable for lies through perjury if they lie to the inquiry.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. And at the end of the inquiry, this inquiry must be open and not limited in its jurisdiction, in a sense that it has to be able to bring anybody and everybody in relation to this and ask them the pertinent questions. Now, people turn around and say, oh, but that's all too wide. It's not. It's absolutely not too wide. Because if we know where we're going, in other words, if we know what we want to find out, A, whether the virus was worthy of the lockdowns, and if science will prove, the scientific evidence and the data is there, that the virus was never worthy of the lockdowns, well, then you've got to move on to ask people who are instrumental in lockdowns, the masking, social distancing. And remember then, we're moving into situations then in the nursing homes where people died alone.
Yeah.
Where the elderly died alone, crying out through windows to their family, and the family crying on the far side. This is one of the most cruel and heinous parts of this crime. So it's very, very important that we actually allocate blame to the people who were responsible for implementing these crimes that I knew as a GP, and I would claim every doctor knew were unnecessary. So that'd be the first thing that I would say that we should endeavour to inquire into. And when it gets to the stage, you'd eventually come around to the vaccine and how unnecessary the vaccine was. Now, if the vaccine was unnecessary, you don't have to have 10,000 deaths. You don't have to have 1,000 deaths. You don't have to have 100 deaths. One death was unnecessary if the vaccine was unnecessary. If there was no reason for the vaccine, one death was murder.
Yeah.
That is the reality. And not, we around the world, we've got hundreds of thousands of deaths. So, like all these things have to be, the blame has to be apportioned. And those who are guilty have to be, I don't know how you go about punishing people for these sort of crimes, but it has to be done. So as I say, that's what that'd be the very, very first thing I would do going into the Dáil. I'd be screaming that. Will other TDs be alongside me in that? Probably not.
I will.
Why?
If I get in.
What? Yeah, well. This is what we would hope. We'd hope that enough nationalists, enough honest people will get in there. But the reality of this is the idea that I was suspended in March of 2021 from the Irish Medical Register for my refusal to administer the vaccine. And they took an emergency measure against me. And in effect, I had no case. I had no court case. I had no hearing per se. They kind of left it on the long finger. And contrary to the legislation of the Medical Practitioners Act, there should have been a time limit put on my suspension. They didn't. Somehow or other, Mary Irvine, the president of the High Court, forgot to put a time limit on it, which resulted in 3.5 years.
So you're still suspended. You cannot practice still to this day. I
cannot practice for 4 years. Getting on for 4 years in March. This is the sheer stupidity of it. The longer they leave me, the more right I get. The longer they leave me, the more people. They should have dispatched me, a month after that suspension or 2 months after that suspension and got me over with. They didn't. They were afraid of me, and as I say, they will. They left it to the stage where the statistics and the figures are coming out, the excess deaths are coming out, and which proves that they were wrong and I was right. And this is the stupid part of it. So as I say, we've got to get to a stage where we can bring about a sworn uh, judicial inquiry into the COVID and all the facts around it, you know. Then
Yeah.
the other thing I would talk about is the scientific basis for global climate change, the environmental impact on the alternative energy sources such as wind farms and solar energy farms on farming and the standard of living of the Irish people. This is massive. This is
Yeah.
absolutely massive, because the reality of it is 97% of scientists around the world now agree that carbon dioxide is not an appreciable greenhouse gas, and that in
Yeah.
effect we need more of it.
Mm.
But you don't hear that
No.
from the media. The media now are pushing climate change. As I said on a number of occasions, in 1971, when I went to University College in Galway, we were told there was global cooling on the way, that there was going to be icebergs coming, or glaciers coming down to the Empire State Building. In fact, glaciers the height of the Empire State Building were going to be there in 50 years. 50 years later, after 10 years of global cooling and 30 years of global warming, when they changed their story, and now they've switched over to climate change, where in effect they can have their cake and eat it. Climate change is a reality. Of course, it happens all the time. Climates are changing all the time. So that what we need is, we need the scientific basis. And I attacked the Green Party on this and asked them for debate, the scientific basis for climate change or global warming or global cooling. And they ran away so fast you wouldn't believe it. Their little legs were worn down at the speed at which they ran away from me. They live a lie. And I told them they live a lie.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so what I'm saying is, we've got to get to the stage. Western society can go nowhere unless we start telling the truth in scientific terms. Because as long as you've got a hoax of net zero carbon dioxide output, in effect, the Western world is at net zero. And it's the Eastern world that are pumping carbon dioxide, which is a good thing. We need carbon dioxide in the air. And like everybody knows this, that farmers and horticulturists pump carbon dioxide into their greenhouses.
Yeah.
So that they get a yield, they get a higher yield. You know,
Yeah.
the space station or submarines, the sailors in submarines and the astronauts in space stations are living in carbon dioxide concentrations up to 10 times what we're living in.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But everybody knows this. Like every scientist in the world knows this. But you cannot, as long as the funding for research and funding for the media is captured by a group of people who have a vested interest in lying, you cannot get the truth out. The problem, what I'm saying is, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to start debating the truth. I need a platform.
Yeah.
As long as I'm Jerry Waters out here in Selbridge, stuck in his own front room, talking to a camera, I'm getting nowhere. But unless people start listening to me, and mark my word, your kids and your grandchildren, Paul, if we can manage to get the truth into science, or at least debate these things, at least come and argue, debate, and prove me to be wrong.
But they can't debate. That's the thing. They cannot debate because they have no argument.
This is the point.
You know?
As I say, I've said to the mass media, you do not have an obligation to protect me from my mistakes or my error or my stupidity. Let me expose my stupidity and my error and my mistakes to the world.
Exactly.
And that way, I'm dismissible. I could be dismissed, but they won't do that, as you say, because they can't. They can't honestly do that.
But I remember years ago, and you probably do it yourself. Today Tonight was the last debate program I think we ever had, where you had one side that argued their point, one side that argued the other point, and the public could get to hear both sides. Now the public just get to see one side. That's it. End of story. If you don't like it, you lump it. And if you call it out for what it is, you're far right, or you're a COVID denier, or you're a climate change denier. And this is how they label people, you know, the sort of way. And like, you can label me what you want. I'm a critical thinker. I can see what's going on around me. I'm watching what's going on in the skies. I'm watching what's going on everywhere. You know what I mean? And like, this stuff is actually happening. But people will tell you you're mental, you know yourself.
Yeah,
Go on,
yeah,
what's your third one?
Well, my third one is to have an open and honest debate on the waste and financial irregularities within the government, as seen recently in the bicycle shed
Yeah.
and the children's hospital. Like, the fact of the matter is, money just doesn't disappear, except in the dole.
Yes.
That's the reality. I had 340,000. Somebody pocketed that money somewhere along the way. Somebody's brother-in-law or cousin or whatever pocketed that money. That is stealing. A friend of mine who's involved in structural steel claims he could buy that shed for 11 grand. Maybe, I don't know, whatever. But, you know, it sounds like there's 300,000 gone missing on that particular bicycle shed. And like, that's a microcosm. That's the microcosm of the reality. This is stealing. This is corruption. And you see, they all tiptoe around it. And nobody actually gets up in the door and says, well, where is the money gone? Who got the money? Who ripped off the government? And how did that particular person rip off the government? Hey, look, if I embezzle or forget to pay, you know, 200 euros, 100 euros, or 10 euros in my taxes.
Yeah.
You know, if I was if I was remiss or missing 1,000 euros in my taxes, and that's money I earned, and I just didn't decide to pay them 52% on it, I'd be up in court.
Of course you would. Yeah.
And if I refuse to pay it, I go to jail. I'd be disgraced. And here's these people, 340,000 has just gone missing. Disappeared into thin air.
Somebody is getting it all right, and they must be all on the fiddle in there. They must have something on every one of them. They must have.
You were talking about, you know, the last debate, that, you know, the debating system on RTE. You know, I would say that they were the innocent days where we actually saw sort of minor corruptions of Charlie Haughey getting his Inish Fickle on his island down in Kerry and his manor up in Malahide and these guys. Again, there was a corruption in the Irish government then. Where Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and Labour all were on the gravy train, and they were all getting. I remember Gareth Fitzgerald had actually bought shares in Guinness Pete or whatever it was, the airline shares, and he borrowed money from Allied Irish. And again, that particular rollout of that company went tits up, and they but Gareth Fitzgerald's loan was forgiven, as was Charlie Haughey's. Like, and these were phenomenal sums. And this was at the stage where I was building my clinic in Selbridge here in 1984, and I was paying 18% interest. Wow. So for the 200,000 or whatever I borrowed, I had to pay 36,000 in interest before I had made a penny. That was a lot of money as a GP to try and scratch together.
Yeah.
And yet these people were getting their loans forgiven, their forfeit, their in effect effort to make quick money. And that's what the idea was. They were trying to buy shares in an airline company, the Ryanair, I think, was it the Ryanair or the original sort of Ryanair, and it didn't happen at the time. I think it was Guinness Pete or something they called it. But as I say, these guys all borrowed money for Allied Irish, and when it went tits up, their loans were forgiven. When I was paying 18% interest rates to try and get a clinic going, like, there was an awful lot of corruption then. And when you say they were arguing in what was you say, 7 days or whatever it was,
today tonight,
I don't think they were genuinely arguing or debating.
Yeah.
I think they were debating what they wanted the public to know. They weren't
yeah,
debating the actual corruption and deviance within the politicians at the time. Anyway,
well, you only have to look. You only have to look at the iPass system now at the moment. This guy Collins from Town B, he was bailed out by NAMA for 43 million euro,
that's
and
right.
this man is building iPass centers now. Come on.
Yeah,
You know,
it's yeah, but you've got to wonder how there's so much profit in these things. Like, surely these iPad centers should, in effect, be built at a minimal profit level to the developers and that. But it seems to be huge profits.
yeah,
They just seem to be reaming in the money. But
yeah,
the other thing, again, moving on, an open and honest explain an open and honest explanation for bringing in unvetted male immigrants into the
yeah,
country.
yeah.
Why can we not have a debate and discussion as to
Mm.
who they are, what they're doing, and why they're coming in, and where they're coming from? Like, these are statistics that should be in the hands of the immigration or the immigration departments.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I was asked today. I was canvassing around Kilmore and Coolock today, and I'd say 20 people said it to me. Now, people have their own interpretation of what's going on, but I'd say 20 people out of the couple of hundred doors said it to me that this is a UN army. Why do you leave your wife and kids at home when
right.
you're fleeing war? Why would you leave your wife and kids in the danger in the firing line and you come over here and live the life of Riley? Some people were saying to me that these are here, they're foreign nationals, they have no obligation to the Irish people, that when it all goes tits up, that these are the people that will be called on to round us up and stop us from doing what we're doing. I don't know how true that is, but it's a theory people are talking about. It really is. And it's not a bad theory.
I think, in the absence of truth and honesty and open discussion on these things, those theories will come to the fore. Of course they will. If they refuse to answer questions, it's like somebody going in to a Garda station and being questioned on a robbery or something, and he picks a spot on the wall and stares at it and continuously says, "No comment, no
No
comment,
comment.
no
Yeah.
comment, no
Yeah.
comment."
In America, it's called pleading the fifth, isn't it?
That's
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
what I'm saying is, the idea now, you see, the barristers and the lawyers and the legals who make money out of people who say that.
Yeah.
And that's the
Yeah.
reality. When you've got people who have vested interests, like the legal profession, who actually make money by nobody admitting to anything and nobody telling the truth. So this is the problem. When they're in a situation where the politicians who should know say no comment, and that's it. That's pretty much the answer they're giving us: no comment, no comment, no comment. When we ask, what are they doing there? As I've said before, I believe they're a provocation. I
Yeah.
believe they're initially meant as a provocation to try and cause unrest in society, to cause people to be feeling uncomfortable. And I would go so far as to say that they are an excuse, perhaps, to bring out agent provocateurs who will cause riots and that.
Yeah.
People
Exactly.
who are paid to cause riots, so that the true patriots can be picked up and interned in the Curragh.
That's
And
exactly
that
what
would
I've been
worry me,
saying.
you know.
I've been saying that for the last 2 years. Okay, that anyone who is speaking out against this government, they're trying to get us all in one place and see who is the most vocal and the most, and they will stop these men. If you look at the arrests that they've made arrests. They put out 100 photographs last week, if you remember, from the riots. Now, somebody has gone in and picked out nearly 25 or 30 of them who were foreign nationals. So the media are not telling you that foreign nationals were there. They were telling you that Irish people, Irish patriots were the ones that were breaking into these premises and the whole lot, when they weren't. So, it's all media corruption. That's all it is. Like,
Oh yes,
750 million RTE were bailed out for. They're hardly going to go against the government. Let's be honest about it.
yeah,
They're the government's puppet,
Yeah. But remember, Paul, that these journalists and editors who are implementing this, these are the prison guards in Auschwitz. These are, in effect, the people who are implementing the the killing off of people. They may not be directly involved in the killing off of people, but they are implemented and they're complicit. The difference is these people are doing it to their own. These people, they're doing it to their own Irish people. They cannot even turn around and say, "Well, I'm not a communist. I'm not a Romani gypsy. I'm not a Jew." They can't even say that. They're doing it, and during the COVID, where they knew that there was something very fishy going on, they were complicit in a crime against themselves. This is the ridiculous thing, and against their families and against their children. Like, that's the very, very sad thing about it. And it's only a matter of time before they come to realize that they are damaging themselves and they're damaging their own gene line, in effect. Their children and the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren. They're delivering them into a totalitarian servitude. Anyway, Paul, if we can move on. I'm just saying.
Go on. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. The other thing would be a discussion on the degree of control exercised by the European bureaucrats and the World Economic Forum on the Irish people. I'd like to know exactly how many of the politicians in this country are in any way associated with the World Economic Forum and the Young Global Leaders scheme.
Yeah.
We know the likes of Leo Varadkar and that, who has been neatly tucked away at the moment. And, he's not even surfacing during the election for some reason or other. We know that these guys have been associated with Klaus Schwab and that. I think there should be absolute open disclosure on every politician, even to the most minor degree, that they've had contact with the World Economic Forum, because the World Economic Forum is an extremely sinister and dangerous organization. And it's very, very important that we know which of our politicians are involved in any way with the World Economic Forum.
Well, you only have to look. Coveney as well is involved as well. Like they're all young global leaders, Yeah,
see, I don't know this for a fact, but I do think that there should be a registry within I would call for a registry within the government, that those who have had any dealings per se, gone to any courses or gone to any training or been brought away or financed by the World Economic Forum, that we know, and it becomes part of their CV so that we can judge them on it.
Yeah. I have one fella posting up here, PJ Malone. Is this nonsense what you're going to get elected on? I doubt it if you will get elected. If telling the truth gets me elected, well, then I'm good for this. I have a man here with me here that's a doctor who has been cut off, who has been speaking out about this for the last couple of years. So, PJ, if you're not going to give us anything productive, just don't give us anything at all.
Well, the fact of the matter is, I will debate any of these subjects with PJ Malone in any forum. There again, he's probably an idiot of some description, because it's as simple as that. I would call him out as an idiot, and probably an extremely low-educated idiot. I will put my medical degree, my 47 years as a doctor, and the PhD that I did in Maynooth College up against his knowledge and his education at any stage.
Good man. Exactly. Now, PJ, put that in your pipe and smoke it. Go ahead. Keep going, Jerry. What's your sixth one?
We're gone. I'd also like an open and honest discussion on the primary and secondary school curriculum. And then also on the perception that there's a left-wing agenda in third level education.
Yes.
Again, these are things that have to be openly and honestly discussed.
Yes.
It's very, very important that that we discuss these things. And honestly, you see, there's absolutely no doubt, but there is some sort of very, very strange efforts being put into secondary and primary education in terms of wokeness. And this idea of, homosexuality and transgenderism and all this, these things have to be discussed.
Yeah.
And they have to be discussed in the context of the normality of them, whether they're normal or whether they're abnormal. I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying that it is worthy of an open and honest discussion without being slapped down and called a racist or a
homophobe or whatever. Yeah.
Well, there are lots of terms that phobia is stuck onto the end of, and a phobia is an irrational fear of a thing.
Yeah.
So it has to be an irrational fear. A phobia is not an actual real. So a fear of a tiger or a fear of a snake is not a phobia per se, unless there's no tigers or snakes in your country. But a fear of something that's not irrational is not a phobia. But they love to stick that term on as a derogatory term. Just going back to the last guy that was on, what was his name? Malone, was it?
PJ Malone, yeah.
Yeah. I would say to PJ Malone, PJ, in all honesty, I don't want to be a politician. I really don't want to be a politician. And if I do go in there, I have vowed that I will hand my salary to charity. I've no desire to be a politician, but I have a desire to tell the truth, and I have a desire to fight for the truth. And no, I don't want to be a politician. I despise politicians generally because of their untruthfulness and dishonesty. So, no, PJ, do me a favor. Come out and vote for somebody else to stop me going in, because you would do me a favor.
But nobody likes politicians. That's the thing. Like, I'm running here because out of necessity. Like, I'm not running here because I want money or because I want power or because I want to be in the Dáil. I'm running here for the same as you, to get the truth out. Like, I will call for a COVID inquiry as well if I get in there, and I'll be calling out every one of them for what they have done to this country over the last 4 years. Over the last 10 years, never mind 4 years, but it's only really got bad the last 4 years. It has. And somebody said to me, it has to get worse before we get it better, Paul. I don't think it can get any worse than this. I'm being honest.
Well, you see, unfortunately, the complexities of the problems that are presented as scientific, like climate change, global cooling, warming, whatever version of it they're going through at a given time, are so complex that really the average person can't understand them. I've studied them. I've studied science and climate science since 1971. When I first did chemistry in Galway University. And I know that it's actually very, very complex. And in fact, I don't think anybody totally understands the concept of anthropogenic. Oh, well, we understand the concept, but like, if you take it, the vast majority of carbon dioxide is actually put into the atmosphere through the seas. And what's at the bottom of the seas? There's some debate as to whether there's 1 million or 3 million volcanoes at the bottom of the seas. Remember, the oceans cover 72% of the Earth. Only 28% of the Earth is covered by oceans. And in effect, the oceans are very, very deep. And down the bottom of those, there are loads of vents spewing out carbon dioxide that eventually gets up to the ocean, up to the sea. So 98% of carbon dioxide is actually coming from these thermal vents and volcanoes at the bottom of the oceans. Like, these are things that people are never, ever, ever told.
Yeah.
And then we potentially contribute 3% of that 3% of carbon dioxide in the air. Like, it's all so unbelievably, ridiculously stupid that if you came up with it out of the blue, everybody you'd literally be committed to a mental hospital. But that's what this guy Malone believes.
Yeah.
Anyway, can we get on?
Go
Uh,
ahead.
yeah, what I would say then, to actually go in and ask for the ask what is the effect, what in effect is the World Health Organization. Open and honest discussion. Open and honest discussion on the influence of the World Health Organization, WHO, on Irish healthcare, particularly on the imposition of the pandemic treaty. They're trying to bring in a pandemic treaty. And the truth of it is, what they will decide the pandemic treaty is based on another COVID hoax
Yeah,
or a similarity. It may well be a bird flu, it may well be anything they like. They can lie and will lie. And they'll bring on another test like the hoax PCR test. Every scientist in the world now knows that the PCR test was a hoax and a
yeah,
scam and dishonest and corrupt and useless. Every scientist knows that.
yeah,
And the idea that the World Health Organization will be capable of closing down the world,
yeah,
or those countries who have actually signed on to their pandemic treaty, is horrifying and remarkably sinister and frightening. And the fact that any government would allow or contemplate this pandemic treaty to go through is to me really, really frightening. The only good thing about it is that Donald Trump has been elected in America, and he hopefully will actually gut the World Health Organization.
yeah,
Hopefully, he will actually literally gut them
yeah.
and do away with their lies and their mendacity and their genocidal efforts, because that's what the World Health Organization is about. It's about
Just
genocide.
because right, you're talking about that there now. Okay, I have a little video there. It's only 30 seconds long. Okay, from Tedros Adhanom, whatever his name is,
Yeah,
the top man there,
Tedros,
and
yeah.
he is saying that there was no coercion and they have no powers and they have nothing. Just let's play this for a minute and we'll come back and talk.
WHO did not impose anything on anyone during the COVID-19 pandemic. Not lockdowns, not mask mandates, not vaccine mandates. We don't have the power to do that. We don't want it, and we're not trying to get it. Our job is to support governments with evidence-based guidance, advice, and when needed, supplies to help them protect their people.
Well, you see, to a degree, he's probably true. That's true, because as of yet, they don't have the pandemic treaty in place.
Yeah,
Well, what they want is to have all those powers.
yeah,
But what they did was they actually encouraged our what is stronger than encouraged, forced the hand of the World Health of the governments to do what they did to me. I suppose to an extent, my refusal to give the vaccine, purely and simply to give the vaccine, brought about my dismissal from the medical register, my being deprived of all medical income, I had to make my staff redundant because I couldn't get in a doctor to take over my practice. I had to sell my premises. It cost me probably hundreds of thousands,
yeah,
not only in lost income over the last 4 years, but just selling off, what you'd call a closing down sale of my practice. Well, I didn't get anything from my practice. I had a goodwill of a practice built up over 40 years. They just took it off me. Good luck.
yeah.
Just chopped the legs from under that goodwill
Mm.
because they didn't give me time to interview doctors, didn't give me time to negotiate with doctors. There was just nothing there. They just destroyed it. And that Tedros then turns around and said there was no coercion.
Yeah.
What a liar. What an absolute liar. And the fact that he can stand up and say that. Well, of course, he could say it. We didn't have the power. They didn't have the power, but they bloody well want it.
Yeah, well, they frightened everybody into getting it. I remember my man and dad getting it just to go on holidays. We want to go on holidays. And the amount of people that did that was, as I told you, I probably told you last week, I had a friend who told me, listen, I have a mate works for Pfizer in New York. Don't touch the vaccine. It hasn't been tested. 6 months later, I get a phone call from him and he's in Lake Garda. And I said, what are you doing? How did you get to Lake Garda without the vaccine? I took it just so I could go on holidays. There was hundreds of thousands of people did that. So that was coercion. Like, I wasn't allowed into a shop without a mask. And if I did go in, it was a big scene. And my missus didn't want to be with me. The kids were freaked. It was horrible. Like, it was a horrible situation to be putting people in, And I'm being honest, they will pay for this. They will pay for it.
Oh, hopefully. But when you think of the sheer audacity and the lies and the twisting, you see, it's the twisting and the warping of the truth. We did not cause, there was no, things were not mandated. You weren't forced. You weren't forced to do anything. Of course you weren't forced. You could starve, or you couldn't go into a restaurant, you couldn't go into a hotel, you couldn't go to a wedding, you couldn't go to a Debs, you couldn't travel. No, of course you weren't forced. If you wanted to live like a hermit and a monk. And, they were getting onto the stage where they were going to threaten to not to serve us in shops.
Yeah. Exactly.
But as I say, if we just go on,
go on to your last one there.
My last one is, and this is something that I think a great deal about, the re-establishment of Christian and Irish cultural principles into education and society at all levels.
Yes,
I think we've got to get back in to the idea that the nuclear family, husband and wife and children, is in effect part of the success of Western society.
Yes.
Yeah. And people coming into Western society from cultures that don't necessarily have those values, those Christian values. They're all like, there's very, very few people immigrating or emigrating to African countries to go and live there.
Yeah.
Unless they're expats and they're going to big, management jobs or that. But at the end of the day, the people are coming to these countries. And I think it's very important that when in Rome, you do as the Romans do.
Yes.
And I think people coming into this country must be prepared to accept that there is a Christian ethos. And that Christian ethos, as far as I'm concerned, is primarily do unto others as you would they do unto you.
Yes.
And that's a hugely important principle. If we live on a principle that we treat others the way we'd like to be treated, it's a nice culture and a nice basis for a culture to stem from.
Yeah, I agree.
They're basically the 9 points that I would endeavour to discuss in the Dáil. Now, there's lots of other things. Yes, there's local problems. And I suppose all politics, as the Healy Rays would testify to, all politics is local. It's about getting a pothole fixed and a bit of stroking here and a bit of stroking there.
Yeah.
I would accept that politics is probably about that's the nature of it. But overall, I think that the bigger things has to be discussed by somebody somewhere along the way.
Somebody just posted up there that they vaccinate people with animal lung cells, canine cells, and fetus cells of unknown origin to call us animals, like in the religious cults calling people sheep, goyim, kafirs. No, I don't know.
Well, the fact of the matter is there's the vaccines that have been so-called vaccines were never vaccines. They were never. You see, getting into vaccination in general and the concepts of vaccination, and the more we discuss it, and the more we learn about it, the less convinced many of us are that the vaccines really did an awful lot of good. And we're coming around to the idea that maybe the vaccines were instrumental in the pandemic of autism and that. I'm beginning to believe, or I'm not beginning to believe, but I'm fairly convinced that the vaccines did in effect caused major problems over and above the things they solved. But that's a discussion for another time. We're in the middle of the greatest crime and the greatest battle against that crime in all history, namely the genocide of messenger RNA and the problems that that's going to cause. And we see it. We see it with every day, every increasing day of the excess mortality. And excess mortality are the deaths. Like people, everybody dies eventually. But when you see pictures of people, or rather graphs of people in certain age groups dying at a rate of 16-20% more than they did generally, that in any other circumstances where in effect the authorities and the establishment were not complicit in the crime, that they would be screaming and jumping up and down. If they didn't know what it was causing, they'd be screaming for answers. They know what caused it, with the result that they want a whitewash of an inquiry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I'll just read out some of these comments here now. Islam is using their religion as a weapon. It's time to revive Christianity in Ireland as one faith. A Christian alliance is needed. I agree.
Well, the reality of it is Islam is not a religion. Islam
it's an ideology,
it's a social, economic, educational, cultural, and political system of ruling the world. I've always said one should not discuss things like gas and that unless one has read the Quran. I've read the Quran 3 times.
Yeah.
And to understand what Islam is about, one has to understand the basis for it. And as I say, it's a sociological way of ruling people. And it's as far as I'm concerned, a very, very frightening religion.
Yes, it is. Someone's putting up there artificial spike proteins. Yeah. Okay.
Well, you see, artificial spike protein primarily is the result of the so-called vaccine, and it's a spike protein primarily is a receptor that affixes to the cell surfaces to facilitate entry into the cells, and that's what's causing a massive amount of the damage, because it attaches to the endothelium of the blood vessels. And if those blood vessels happen to be in the brain, you end up with aneurysms and damage to the brain and bleeds and that. If it happens to be in the heart, you end up with myocarditis. And a myocarditis can either, you could actually burst a blood vessel in the heart.
Yeah.
But you could also end up with a myocarditis, you end up with scarring. And invariably scarring in the heart gives rise to rhythm problems. And if your heart isn't beating at a proper rhythm, if it's going too fast or it's going irregularly, the blood supply to your brain is cut off. And I think this is a lot of these deaths of footballers in the presence of adrenaline, when they get excited during a match and with exercise. Suddenly they get a dysrhythmia where in effect the heart is not pumping properly. What's that?
That's one there we have. Exclusive. Spike in rare brain infections in kids raises more questions than answers.
That's quite interesting. That was in some Nevada, was it? Where they suddenly start getting abscesses, brain abscesses from a staphylococcus, and these are very, very, very rare in children. I've never seen one, but they were getting whole floods of them. Well, I don't know if it was floods, but there were lots of them. It was shooting up, and that was they reckoned that it was due to the related to the vaccine, but it was because the children were not capable of fighting these normal bacteria that would inhabit the nose and throat. and they were gaining entrance to the brain. And I say there was a whole spate of them in certain American states of brain abscesses. Again, I think it's just a demonstration of the damage that the so-called vaccine was causing.
Well, in your 47 years, you've never seen it. And this doctor says here, in my 20 years experience, I've never seen anything like it. Dr. Tarian Bragg.
Yeah, but he was a neurosurgeon, so he would have been in centres for seeing them. I never saw a brain abscess in a child in my 47 years as a GP, or 40 years as a GP, and my 7 years as a hospital doctor and that.
Yeah, that's crazy, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Crazy, yeah. But there's a lot of stuff we haven't seen, you know what I mean, that's happening now, you know what I mean? I have a video there now, I tell you, we've, 10, 12 minutes left. This video is 3 minutes 40. Okay, this is about.
Yeah, that's it.
We'll watch this here now. It's about in America, one of the most heavily vaccinated. We'll play it and we'll come back.
Heavily vaxxed county faces a grim reality. We tried to warn you. I don't like reporting this stuff, but Vigilant Fox has it all. One of the most vaxxed counties in America is now facing a heart attack crisis. A peer-reviewed study has found a jaw-dropping 1,236% surge in excess heart attack deaths among King County's 2.2 million residents. 2020 had 11 excess deaths, 2021, 75, 22, 111, and 23, 147, which is a 1,236% increase compared to 2020. You can see the excess cardiopulmonary arrest deaths from 2015 to 2023 in King County, Washington. That is a vertical jump, nearly. Moreover, cardiac arrest deaths in general rose about 25% from 2020 to 2023, and in the same time frame, Kings County population shrunk slightly. So we should have seen a direct correlation where things reduced. Reflecting on this alarming data, cardiologist Peter McCullough explained what this means. Watch.
Peer-reviewed study reveals 1,236% surge in excess cardiac arrest deaths among 2 million COVID-19 vaccinated individuals. Well, this is something I don't think you're going to hear in a lot of mainstream corporate media that's backed by the big pharma. Are you, doctor?
No, and what we've learned is we utilize the Medic One data in Seattle. You know, I did my residency in Seattle, so I know Medic One very well from decades ago. They're the elite paramedic unit in the United States, probably the top paramedic system, and they keep pristine data on cardiac arrest, Brandon, that happened in Seattle. And it turns out the pandemic, Seattle was 98% vaccinated. And when the vaccines rolled out, the cardiac arrests skyrocketed and the mortality rate for this cardiac arrest skyrocketed. Meanwhile, the population of Seattle contracted a little bit through the pandemic. So it looks like the vaccines are the smoking gun. This is now fully peer-reviewed in the emergency medicine literature. We've messaged the Medic One unit in Seattle. They clearly need to do now more research to figure out, how soon these vaccines were administered and to whom. But the learning point here is it takes about 2 million people in terms of a population before we see a signal in cardiac arrest. So there have been papers saying, well, we haven't seen cardiac arrests in the NFL. Well, you need to get to about 2 million people to see the signal.
Did you say 98% of Seattle have been vaccinated with the COVID shot?
Yeah.
Oof. Yeah, that is. Now, it's obviously not surprising considering it's Seattle, but more importantly than that, have you ever asked yourself, are you behaving well this year, or are you going to get coal in your stocking? Because the only thing worse than that is to find out that you are getting imported meat in your fridge. Now, this holiday, Christmas, and Thanksgiving season, Good Ranchers ensures that you get the gift of meat you can trust. With their holiday special, subscribe to any box.
Right, that's just an advertisement there coming up now. After that.
But imported meat from Ireland.
But that is crazy.
Yeah, well, you see, there tends to be a little bit of confusion between cardiac arrest and myocardial infarction and MI. A cardiac arrest is when the heart stops, and that's exactly what I was talking about earlier on, where the spike protein causes scarring to the heart, which result in rhythm. The rhythm goes crazy, and the heart just it stops pumping. You get what we call a ventricular fibrillation or that. So that, as opposed to an MI is a myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack. So there is a slight difference. Cardiac arrest is quite rare, whereas myocardial infarction, it may appear to be splitting hairs, but lots and lots of people get heart attacks and survive them. A cardiac arrest, you don't survive. And these are the insidious and frightening things, that if you scar heart muscle, it is likely at some stage, it might be a year, it might be 2 years, it might be 3 years down the road, to suddenly go into a dysrhythmia or an arrhythmia where there's no rhythm and you get a cardiac arrest. So those figures the big figures in cardiac arrest may well be on its way, rather than, as I say, maybe this is getting too complicated, but there is a difference between an MI, a myocardial infarction, and a cardiac arrest, as McCullough talks about there. And I would feel it's important to differentiate between those two. But, anyway, like some people say, I had a heart attack, or I got bypass surgery. They fundamentally would be towards a myocardial infarction as opposed to a cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
But again, maybe I'm splitting hairs. Maybe I'm,
Well, you're the doctor. I'm only here to help you out. You're the man who knows what you're talking about.
It's just that came up, and I thought that well, I suppose to an extent, as a doctor, it is my job to elucidate and try and point out things, like the difference between an MI and a cardiac arrest,
Yeah. Listen, we've had 450 watching this live here now, which is brilliant for tonight. Fair play to everyone who tuned in. Fair play. We have another. Anything else you want to talk about, Doctor? There. We have. This girl here, the vaccine contained DNA of chimpanzee. It was listed on the AstraZeneca leaflet.
Well, it's not actually a chimpanzee. It's what they call the green monkey, the SV40. The simian virus monkey SV40. It's not actually a chimpanzee. It's what they call a green monkey. But that's probably, again, splitting hairs.
Yeah, because listen, I've been monkeying around for years, and I took over.
You get monkeypox.
That's it. That's another thing, isn't it? Monkeypox. Jesus Christ.
Monkeypox again was just another scam that the World Health Organization tried to keep. See, populations are easier, much, much, much easier to keep in control if you have them frightened and scared all the time. And this is why a lot of this, like you hear about all this climate change, and they're trying to emphasize, they're wetting themselves talking about the flooding in Spain and that. But that's been happening, in my experience, every year over since we had television. I think we got television when I was about 11. We were watching these things, but it wasn't being pushed to try and frighten people into thinking, there's huge climate change, and this is the hottest year, the coldest year, and they just lie about it. As for, kind of say, we're fairly certain that 24 is going to be the hottest year ever. That's the greatest load of rubbish ever. It's impossible, almost impossible, to measure the heat of the planet. And the reality of it is, these changes are related to massive tidal waves in the Pacific Ocean causing El Nino. There's massive changes, and for some reason or other that they haven't quite figured out, suddenly the water starts flowing in different directions in the Pacific Ocean, which is one massive ocean, and it causes different atmospheric changes on the West Coast and, in fact, right across America, El Nino. And then there's different phases, and then there's El Nino is the little boy, and then they have the little girl. Oh dear, what do they call it? Not El Nino. I thought of it 3 minutes ago, and it's gone out of my head. But so there are different decadal ocean currents that change, and these give rise to various climatic changes around
La Nina.
La Nina, that's right, yeah. And these come up every now and again. They haven't quite figured, well, they know about these rhythms and these cycles, and they, as I say, these are actually what give rise to the changes, not carbon dioxide. And we can't change these decadal ocean currents, and they're changing.
Yeah.
We can do nothing about it. It's got nothing to do with carbon dioxide, and it's got nothing to do with methane. It's got nothing to do with nitrogen. It's got nothing to do with any of these things, and we can't in any way influence it. So the idea that taxing you and tax credits and all that, it's all a scam and a hoax. And
I'll read out the last comment here now. Thanks to the doctor, it's been a breath of fresh air listening to his common sense as opposed to the fear porn propagated on the mainstream media.
Absolutely.
We're at the hour now, Dr. Jerry. So fair play to you. It's been
I have to go to another, as I say.
I know you have to go.
You know?
I have my screen up there, so I'll finish off there now. I'll drop you down, and I will talk to you next week, please.
Thanks,
God.
Paul.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jerry Waters.
Paul, for your very professional intervention.
Thank you very much, Jerry. I'll talk to you later. Well, there you go, folks. I'm going to do this again tonight. I do this at the end of my own show. The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. You just let it loose and it defends itself. And remember, trust the science. Good night and God bless.